Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and welcome to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
You gotta light 'em up before they burn it down. Better dig deep, put 'em in the ground. Blood on their hands, they're hellbound. Save us all. Ooh, they're gonna burn it down. Save us all before they burn it down.
This episode of the Steadfast and Loyal podcast is brought to us by our friends at the United States Concealed Carry Association. The USCCA helps responsible Americans like you prepare for what happens before, during, and after an act of lawful self-defense. USCCA members get life-saving education, expert training, plus self-defense liability insurance. These benefits provide more than 500,000 USCCA members with the peace of mind that they deserve. Plus, a USCCA membership is always risk-free with their 100% money-back, quote-unquote, bulletproof guarantee. Membership is truly an investment worth exploring. Click Learn More below right now to activate your United States Concealed Carry Association membership. Click Learn More right now. And remember, the USCCA is not an insurance company. A policy has been issued to the USCCA by Universal Fire and Casualty Insurance Company. That policy provides the association and its members with self-defense liability insurance subject to its terms, conditions, limitations, and exclusions. And ladies and gentlemen, if we continue to have violent criminals released back out onto the streets, you have the right to be able to defend yourself, and the USCCA will make sure that you can have a proper defense of yourself if it comes to a legal court hearing. We'll be right back. Hey, greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. As promised, I'm joined now with Gianno Caldwell. He is a TV host, Gianno Caldwell is a TV host, political analyst. You know, why is it that Southern people have problems with certain words? Let me try it again. Gianno Caldwell is a TV host, political analyst for Fox News, and the founder of Caldwell Strategic Consulting, a bipartisan firm in Washington, D.C. that provides strategic advice and consulting in the areas of public affairs. Gianno was raised on the south side of Chicago. He got his first job in politics at the age of 14 when he walked into the local alderman's office in the hopes of making the world a better place. For the next 17 years, Gianno has held various leadership roles at the federal, state, and local levels. His work in politics and consulting eventually led to becoming an on-air analyst and host for radio and television. Gianno's first book, Taken for Granted: How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed Largely, recounts his childhood in streets filled with violence, poverty, and drugs, including his own mother's addiction. And I think many of you remember the sad occasion about his younger brother, and the way in which conservative values helped him achieve his dreams in reaching D.C. and Los Angeles. His hope is that other Americans will be motivated by his journey and focus again on faith, hard work, and self-determination. Gianno, thank you so much for joining us at the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It really means a great deal to me to be with such a patriot as you are.
Well,
and you've blazed the trail for a lot of folks to come behind, especially young African-American conservatives. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, it's my pleasure. That's what it's supposed to be about, not about you and what you achieve, but what you enable others to do. And with that being said, I was just recently in your hometown of Chicago for the Black Conservative Summit held there, Dr. Eric Wallace. We were actually kind of outside Chicago in Tinley Park. But, you know, we have got to start looking at what we can do to get conservatism, this message of faith, family, individual freedom and responsibility, small business entrepreneurship, better education opportunities. We got to get that back into our inner city communities, because I grew up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, and the things that I saw growing up back, 60s and 70s, they've disappeared. How can we get this back? And then we'll talk about your book, Taken for Granted.
I think it always amounts back to the home, or someone that a young person or even an older person tends to trust their advice and just kind of live the experience that I think people can relate to. For me, when I jumped into conservatism, it didn't happen right away. I was actually having a conversation with an African American fellow, older guy, on one of the street corners of Chicago, who happened to be a Democrat, but he said a bunch of things that I had never heard before. Mm-hmm. Like MLK was a Republican. I was like, what? Never. That couldn't be true. No way that's possible. The first members of Congress that were African Americans were conservatives. Wait, I never heard that. Mm-hmm. So anytime I am told different things, especially if I have no knowledge of it, I'll go and research so I can have a stronger argument for later conversations. And that's when I realized that the Republican Party was started in 1854 in opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which wanted to expand slavery. Mm-hmm. I learned that a lot of not a lot, but all the Jim Crow policies were Democratic-centric policies. I learned that every civil rights bill, including LBJ's 1964 civil rights bill, was only passed because of Republican support. When it comes to people having that knowledge base, that's what counts more than anything else, the spread of knowledge. But I know a lot of folks, especially in neighborhoods like I grew up in on the south side of Chicago, are very, very resistant to it because every institution within those communities are left-leaning and liberal. So for anyone to come out with an idea that's different than the Democratic Party is the party that you should be a part of, especially if you're Black, you begin to get alienated immediately. There's no waiting. There's no, let's have a discussion and let me inform you on this, that, and the other. You ultimately, to a lot of the folks within those communities, become an enemy, and one in which they think is detrimental to their communities, the ones that I grew up in, and especially folks who want to grow up and live a different life than the one in which they grew up in.
It's interesting you say that because, I was humbled and honored to be the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. And when I would tell folks that the largest state Republican Party in the United States of America was founded on Independence Day of 1867 by 150 Black men in Houston, Texas, whites, Black, didn't matter. They were just floored. And it reminds me of what it says in the Bible, that my people suffer for lack of knowledge. And you bring up a great point in that when you all of a sudden have this epiphany moment, kind of like, Saul being transformed into Paul, it's incredible how it's other Blacks that will come out and vehemently attack you. I mean, it's just the same as how today, there's so many that denigrate and disparage the person I call my ideological mentor, and that's Booker T. Washington. Why do you think we're not getting this type of education into our community? Why do you think that we are, putting boxes on, we can only understand these aspects of history? When you talk about slavery, 1619, but no one wants to talk about the Democrat Party relationship, like you said, with the Ku Klux Klan, lynchings, Jim Crow, all these things. Why do you think that is?
I mean, it's a control of a narrative. I think largely people, especially even within our own community, to be honest and frank, a lot of us see the least of us, and I'm talking about folks who are poor, who in some cases can't do for themselves, and in other cases could simply not want to do, and they're comfortable in their set of circumstances. They could be comfortable receiving government assistance, welfare, not wanting to necessarily do the work to usurp that existence and create something new for themselves. Those folks are and it's perceived by a lot of folks as just victims. So if you're going to have countless victims, then you can't change the status quo that much, because one of the things I think Democrats did that was which has kept folks in that victimhood is the welfare policies.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'm reminded of, which I thought was really great, was the '96 welfare reform with Newt Gingrich
Yes.
and Bill Clinton.
Yes.
What they did is unleashed potential in particular areas. If you want to receive these benefits and you're not disabled, meaning you can work, you need to either work or go to school. And then when you worked, and I know this pretty well because I worked for a federal agency at that time. At 16, I started working for the Social Security Administration part-time, 25 hours a week, 40 hours in the summers and winters until I graduated high school and I got a full-time role. There was a lady there who was a work mentor of mine. She taught me how to do this particular job. She was a welfare recipient. Currently, at that time, she was a welfare recipient, and she was also getting a full-time check. Ultimately, at a particular point within her career at that agency, she came off this program that they set up for welfare recipients, and she became a permanent hire, and she came off of welfare. So she was able to do for herself, but they did not take her off the system when she started making a little bit of money, which is some of the policies that were crafted by Democrats to keep you locked into poverty. So if you go out and you decide, okay, I'm going to do for myself, let me go work a job at McDonald's or, a low wage job because you may not have skills or education. As soon as you start making a little bit of money, they snatch you off this welfare program, and that makes people panic. That puts them in fear because they know that the welfare is consistent. They could end up being fired for doing something in 2 days or 3 days, and then you can be in a situation with no money. So it wasn't until the '96 reform, welfare reform, that things began to change and look differently. But Obama took us right back.
Yeah, wasn't
And
it
that
amazing?
became a huge issue.
Wasn't it amazing that the quote unquote first black president, son of Chicago, comes in and reverses that? It's
Yes.
almost as if we want that perpetual victimization, instead of allowing people to be victors. And, another thing that I have seen happen within our community that I think has had a detrimental effect on our community is the breakdown of the traditional nuclear family. And
That's right.
in 61, when I was born, I'm getting up there. In 61, when I was born, 75 to 77% of the households in the black community had mommies and daddies in the home. But look at where we are today. And what's amazing to me, we have this organization, Black Lives Matter, and they said it on their website that we are against the traditional nuclear family. They were against the thing that made the black community strong. And you've seen that, I'm sure, there in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chicago was even much more of an interesting place as we saw the projects there where they had folks who were receiving government assistance. They largely stayed in these housing projects that could be 30 stories high. And they were caged up. So as you're outside of your house, there was a big cage that surrounded the building, which some people viewed as a prison. They ended up tearing those projects down and relocating people all across the city. So that's why you see in part why violence is so bad in Chicago. You mentioned my brother earlier, my baby brother Christian was murdered June 24th, 2022. So last year, he was murdered. And as a result, when you're thinking about the crime and how bad it's gotten over the decades, is because they relocated all these people out of the projects. And then they said, okay, you'll be able to get a Section 8 voucher. This is government money that'll allow you to stay outside of the projects in a home here or there. You can be in an actual house, apartment, or whatever the case. But if you have someone who went to prison, jail, maybe this is the child's parent, that maybe this is the dad. He's not allowed to stay with you, or we're going to cut you off the program and you'll be homeless. Yeah. So when you talk about the nuclear family and what's going on, folks have made mistakes and they've been criminalized for those mistakes to the degree that it's better off for a woman who's black to not have a dad in the home because she can get more benefits for those kids because she doesn't have that income. And it became normalized it became normalized, and it has been a detriment ever since. And even before then, we've seen policies that were looking to separate men from the women, separate men from their children. And what we got from it is total dysfunction. And and we know that when a man is in the house with his children, his family, the kids are better off, and statistically, they're more likely to be successful if that's the case.
Yeah.
So we have an entire breakdown of institution, the family being the number one institution,
You know,
and it must come to an end. That must change. I'm thankful, at least, because I think there's a little bit of a reversal that's happening now. We're seeing an uptick of married Black families, I think, but still is not enough. We need to do much more, and there needs to be an encouragement of those who may not necessarily have kids, but they're successful African American men. Go out and adopt a child, and I don't mean necessarily adopt them by doing the paperwork, but go be a mentor.
Yeah.
Join 100 Black Men of Chicago or whatever those organizations are that want to invest back into those communities and give a child an inspirational figure to look up to so they can make some of these better decisions. Because what we've seen in our country, not just in Chicago, crime going up, and it's a lot of juveniles that are doing it. In Chicago, as an example, 80% of the homicides that are occurring are Black men shooting Black men. And that's a major problem.
And that doesn't make the news. I wonder, why that doesn't make a news, or why Black Lives Matter is not showing up and talking about those type of things. It really reminds me of the movie The Matrix, where you're in this world and there's a challenge. I mean, you can take the blue pill. It's funny they say the blue pill, and stay in the matrix, or you could take the red pill and come out of it. And I think that there are a lot of people in the inner city urban communities, they're afraid to take that red pill and come out of it. So that kind of transitions us over to your book, Taken for Granted: How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed. Without a doubt, the leftist policies, if you want to look at a community in a whole, has grossly failed the Black community. And like I said, you can look at any of the urban centers. How do we come up with a prescription to reverse this? Because like you say, some people are going to want to stay in that matrix, but how can we start to make a difference?
You know what? What's interesting is I thought in the Trump era, and I know a lot of people may say Trump, how? In the Trump era, I think that there was a lot of people who were much more exposed to conservatism, exposed to the values of the Republican Party, and we saw an uptick in Black support voters, 8% in 2016. Then we saw an even greater percentage of African Americans and Hispanics that chose to support his candidacy. I think, in my personal opinion, the behavior of Trump, if you will, wasn't something that I'd necessarily connected to, but he was, and without question in my mind, the most impactful president for African Americans that I've ever seen in my lifetime. Now, I know a lot of groups he's helped. He's helped the farmers. He's helped a lot of different communities. But this was the only president of either Democrat or Republican that was laser focused on the issues of the Black community. And it was very, very helpful. It was inspiring to see. And I think a lot of people, as a result, said, you know what? When he went and he said to folks, he said, what do you have to lose by electing me? Your schools are no good, which in a lot of areas, you look at Baltimore as an example.
Oh, my God.
Failing schools, in Chicago, failing schools, all these inner cities. You've been voting for these people for 50 years. What have they given you? What do you have to lose? And people thought it was just such a problematic statement. But the truth is, what do we have to, literally, they've not done anything. And it's really put them on their heels, because at that time, all they had to do is call you names and Republicans would back off.
Yeah.
You start calling them names, so they wouldn't even mention it. They would stay free and clear of that. But what we've seen is folks who are sports figures, folks, you think about Kanye West, and of course, a lot of us may not agree with how he moves in certain areas of life. But at the same time, there were people who were willing to stand up and take those arrows from the mainstream media, from the Al Sharptons of the world and the Jesse Jacksons. They were willing to take those arrows and say, Ice Cube is another good example. He wasn't a Republican, but he was willing to work with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which didn't want to work with him. They told him, hey, if you want to do something for the black community, let's wait until after the election. And they still don't return his calls to this day.
Wow.
But there's people who are willing to stand up and say enough is enough. And I think that's why I feel like we have an awakening that's going on within the United States of America, because people are fed up with it. They're fed up with nothing being done, but you showing up every year around election time to talk about how racist Republicans are and how you couldn't get any agenda passed because of racist Republicans. And they did that in Chicago, too,
I can
mind
believe
you.
it.
And what Republicans are in Chicago? You know what I mean? Like, so what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's always a finger pointing and never an accepting of personal responsibility. And that's what's been the problem in that space. But I think things are changing. We just got to keep our voices out there, keep showing folks of diverse viewpoints and looks what the Republican Party means to them. And I think that's going to bring more people to our side. But it's not going to happen overnight, and it may take years to do it, but we have to be consistent.
You're absolutely right. And that's why I remember when Reince Priebus, who was the chairman of the RNC, he talked about, what was it, outreach. And I told him, I said, I don't want to hear the word outreach, because outreach always means you show up in Black History Month, and then no one ever sees you again until a couple of months before an election, and you say, here we are, why don't you vote? You got to have continuous, consistent engagement. You've got to talk about these issues. You got to talk about your history. And most importantly, you got to stop being on defense and go on offense against the left and their failures, especially in the major urban population centers. The teachers' unions don't care about educating Black kids. And I think it has to be very evident. And you brought up Chicago and Baltimore, but that's even here where I live in the Dallas area or any urban center. So you've got an election coming up here in Chicago. Where do you think that's going to go? And what do you see as the future for the Windy City there?
Well, you know what? I've been very active and involved. I was very vocal around Lori Lightfoot. I've called her out on television many times. I've reached out to her office about my brother. They didn't care. They didn't want to talk because of the work I do at Fox News, it was the highest profile murder in Chicago all of last year. Mm-hmm. It was the highest profile murder. Now, it was very difficult for me to even try to get a little bit of movement. And I got John Walsh, who's doing commercials with me that I'm putting on local Fox television, running them every hour to try to get justice for my little brother. And there's so many people who don't even have the resources. They don't have a powerful name to be behind them. They don't have the money to bury their child. Funerals are expensive. I didn't know that until I had to pay for one. Funerals are very expensive. And there's a lot of poor people in Chicago who don't have that kind of money to pay for funerals. So Lori Lightfoot had to go. There was no question about it. She created a no-chase policy where police could not chase suspects on foot. If they were going to chase them in their cars, they had to call their supervisors to get permission. She's really handcuffed the police to the detriment of many of Chicago's citizens. It was the number one issue in 20 years, crime was, for this past election. Number one issue, because even in the prominent white areas, they were being robbed. They were being shot at. They were being murdered. So it was a very serious situation for all of Chicagoans. And now we have a runoff with Brandon Johnson, who's a progressive, and Paul Vallis, who's a centrist. As he's more moderate in the middle kind of guy, but he believes in supporting the police. He doesn't believe in defunding the police, Paul Vallis, that is. He believes in school choice and fiscal responsibility. And they're calling him a Republican because of those beliefs. And truth be told, crime and safety was not a Republican or a Democrat issue.
It's a life issue.
Yeah, look, this is as a right of a citizen of anywhere in America, it should be safety is the number one for everyone.
Yeah,
like this is just living and breathing within our borders. This is what you are entitled to. And now the thing is flipped on its head, and the polling is so close with these two candidates. I just hope Paul Vallis pulls it out, because my concern is that Brandon Johnson is able to win, that we're going to see even more Black bodies littered in the streets of Chicago, because this man has defended the looters, the rioters, and he doesn't give a damn about the police. He doesn't give a damn about safety and security for the residents of Chicago. So we got to flip this thing on its head and make changes in Chicago, and they need to be pretty radical to get things back under control. Kim Fox is another problem, the county
Oh yeah,
prosecutor there.
yeah.
Yeah, one in which Brandon Johnson actually said operates with great integrity. This is the one who dropped all charges in the Jesse Smollett's hoax. And people know all about that.
Oh
I
yeah.
know folks have heard about it time and time again. But we got to make some sincere changes in Chicago, and I'm hopeful that Paul Vallis is the guy to do that. I'm cautiously optimistic because we all remember what happened in New York with Adams
Eric
after he got
Adams.
in,
Yep.
the mayor. Yeah, you know, it's been mixed results. It hasn't been all the stuff that he claimed he was going to be doing, coming down on a heavy hand. He needs to be more vocal. He needs to have more cops on the street, because even a colleague of ours over at Fox, Adam Klotz, was beat
Oh, no,
up
I
on
saw
a train
that.
by
Yes.
a juvenile.
Yes.
You know, this is ridiculous. This had never been an issue to this degree, because everyone could agree that you needed police before George Floyd, and you saw the folks on the left really took advantage of that and caused billions of dollars of damage and saying, oh yeah, folks have a right to riot and loot. No, they don't. They absolutely don't. They have a right to peacefully protest and exercise their First Amendment rights, but they don't have rights to change civilization for all of the United States, because folks are upset, and rightfully so. People were upset, but not to the degree that they're going to steal and take what that doesn't belong to them.
Well,
that's not the country that we live in.
Well, the left believes that you have a riot to protest and loot and do those type of things and destroy property if you're aligned with their ideological agenda.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I mean, that's the thing. They'll excuse anything. So as we get ready to wrap up, where can people find you out there and all the great work that you're doing? Where can people get your book, Taken for Granted, How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed?
Well, I would appreciate definitely pick up the book. It's on Amazon right now, Taken for Granted, How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed. And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Gianno Caldwell, Gianno Caldwell, Caldwell.
Well, I want to tell you, I'm so proud of you, and thank you for joining us here at the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. And you are truly the reason why, you know, us old heads, the gray heads, we get out there and we plug through, because we've got to set the conditions for your success. And when I see young men such as yourself, it just really warms my heart. So thanks so very much for all that you do, Gianno Caldwell.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and thank you for your service to this country.
That's my pleasure and honor. God bless you, and all the best as you continue to plug away, Gianno.
God bless you as well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. Special thanks goes out to Gianno Caldwell. And again, just heartfelt condolences for the loss of his younger brother in an act of violence there in his hometown of Chicago. If you like this podcast, please click the like button, share it with others, because we're here to make sure that you can be activated to preserve and protect this constitutional republic. God bless you. See you next time.
Before they burn it down.